Hello, this is Tony, and we are back with the next part of the ATS Bootcamp. We're onto personnel movement. In this tutorial, we'll be going over personnel movement. We'll cover vehicle movement in a later video. When it's your impulse, you'll declare what unit or units you'll activate. You'll choose whether to move or fire. This is the move and fire segment. When you choose to move, you'll declare what type of movement you will commit. Per Rule 11.1.1, you need to declare before you move the unit. There are three types of movement. There is crawling, which is moving to an adjacent location, assault movement, the most common movement, and running, which you get to move farther, but there are penalties involved with that. As you may have noticed in the anatomy of the personnel unit, there isn't a movement factor printed on the counter. The movement allowance are standard for each personnel unit. Leaders are the exception, and we'll go over those exceptions. Let's go ahead and take a look at the different types of movements in action. The first type of movement, and let's go ahead and zoom in, not out. The first type of movement we are going to talk about is crawling, which is moving to an adjacent structure, or adjacent, you could structure anything. So that would typically be moving this unit into one hex over. Oh, and it doesn't matter the movement point cost as long as it's not prohibited. So if you can see, this unit is basically pretty much so surrounded by bocage. Bocage is 2 plus the cost of terrain to cost. So moving into K15 would cost you 3 movement points if you were assault moving. In this case, with the crawling, all you're going to do is you're going to go from here and then to there. When you crawl and when you do any other type of movement, you will use movement markers, movement arrows. Now, depending on the area or anything like that, you may have some with fast or dash lines or anything like that. Don't worry about that so much as where you place the arrow. If you are crawling, you will place it on top. This indicates that the unit has crawled. Now, this is important when we get into direct fire because there are modifiers that change different things. So, that is crawling. The next type of movement we're going to discuss is the assault movement. Now, assault movement gives you 4 movement points. A clear hex terrain, so I-15, I-16, is 1 movement point. And as I discussed earlier, the bocage is a hex side terrain that could cause more points. So in this case, the unit here can move 4 hexes on clear hexes. So let's go ahead and take a look at a little bit of a scenario and go from there. So let's say we wanted to get to this hex into this building on E14. And our unit is currently in E15. Now, he has to go through and to get here. And unfortunately, it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 movement points. But let's take a look at assault movement and we'll see where we end up. So we take our unit and basically it is as simple as 1, 2, 3, 4 into the orchard. Orchards are 1 movement point. You'll just verify that on your terrain charts. When you do a assault move or a running move, you will take the arrow and you'll put it behind. Now some people do it where it's from the hex they came from, which isn't always a bad idea, so you have an idea of where they came from, or just put it behind. It really doesn't matter. Just so as long as you know that it is assault movement, because that does give you some modifiers when you're being fired on. So in this case, where he started out, if he used assault move, he could not make it to the building in E14. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at the running and see if we can then get into the building. Okay, so let's take a look at running movement and see if we can get into the building for the running movement. So let's take a look at that. So running movement gives you 7 movement points. Now, so again, the orchard is 1 movement point. The building to move into is 2. So let's see if we can get into the building. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So running gets you into the building. There's a few things you need to do. So yes, you do need to push your arrow behind, but you will also need to take a winded marker, and the winded marker looks like this, and it needs to be placed on top because, again, there are some modifiers that happen during the winded. This will stay on until the unit is activated the next turn. It cannot run in the next turn. It can only assault, move, crawl, or fire. It cannot run. Or if you pass with it, that'll work out either way. So that's running. Pretty simple, gives you them. And there are some direct fire modifications that make it worse for you to get shot at, as well as for you to shoot while the winded marker is on there. Okay, so now if we have a leader with us, this will change. So let's take a look, and I'll reset it and I'll add a leader. As you will see, I have added Captain Reed to my stack. So Captain Reed has one more, so if it's just a leader, has one more movement point. So if you did assault moved, a leader can go 5. If you run, a leader can go 8. So if we stack, and the nice thing is that 1 point will go along with that unit that it's stacked with. So in this case, he has 5 movement points. As long as he activates the whole stack and they stay together, he'll go with 5 movement points. So in this case, he can still go 1, 2, 3, 4. He can't go into the building because that's 2 more movement points. But maybe, and he can't cross the wall here because that's extra movement points as well. But he could maybe go up into the other orchard in that case. So let's go ahead and reset. And of course, you do the same thing. You put the arrow behind. Now, leaders do not affect crawling at all. So let's go ahead and reset. So if we were to run, so now he has 8 movement points. So let's say he wants to get, let's see how things go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He could go 7 and then 8. So, so he could go all the way around the building with a leader. And so as you can see, having a leader stack does help quite a bit on the for the movement factors if you have a leader with you. Again, that would be marked with a winded marker. They couldn't run the next turn. So all that stays the same. So really, when you get down to it, the leaders add 1 more movement point, but it does not affect crawling. There is one type of movement that I do want to talk about, which is called Platoon Movement. But before I do that, we need to talk about stacking and how many units can actually be in a hex at the same time. It's pretty easy to remember. When it comes to personnel, you can have up to 12 stacking points. Stacking points are pretty easy to remember because each unit, the number of silhouettes on the unit is the number of stacking points. So if you look at what I have here, we have 3 squads, 3 full squads. Each one has 3 units, 3 figures on it, 3 silhouettes. So each one is 3 stacking, and stacking points also indicate carrying points, which we'll get into in a little while. But in this case, if we were to stack all 3 of these together, this would be 9 stacking points. You could still add an entire another squad into that. A leader is 1 stacking point. So if we put all these entire stack together, that would be 10 stacking points. You could still add a crew or a reduced squad, anything along those lines, as long as you're not over the 12 stacking points. So that's stacking. Now, let's go ahead and get into platoon movement. Platoon movement is when you move more than 1 unit from a hex. There are 2 types of platoon movements. There's single hex movement, or single hex, and multi-hex. Let's take a look at the single hex because it's probably the easiest, and there are no real restrictions on a single hex activation. So the way I've got it set up right now is I have all 3 of those squads set up in J15 here. So what a single hex movement is you can actually just move all three into the next movements. You cannot drop off or pick up any other units as you're walking, as you're moving, but you could go, if we wanted to go to F13, because we have four movement points, we could go 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, 4. Yeah, I miscounted there. So that is a single hex stacking, or single hex platoon movement. Pretty simple, pretty easy. You do not need a leader. You just activate the hex, move everybody in it. Now, you don't have to move everybody, because you don't have to activate everybody in a hex. You can activate an individual unit. But if you activate all of the units, they all have to move, and they all have to move and stop together. Now, let's set up for a multi-hex platoon move. So I have gotten things set up for a multi-hex platoon movement. A couple of things that you need to have for a multi-hex platoon is the units must be adjacent to each other, and you can have no more than 3 hexes in a platoon movement. One of the other issues, or one of the other requirements, is you have to have a leader in one of the 3. You don't have to have it in the center, but you do have to have it in one of these 3 squads. Has to have a leader. So we've got, let's see, we got Captain, who we got here? Captain Lay. Captain Lay is going to be in here. Now, with platoon movement, it's pretty easy. You get the +1 movement from the leader. So assault would be 5, while running would be 8. You do get winded. Now, you do have to move simultaneously. And obviously, physically, it's really hard to you could do it that way, but that just gets in the way. So what you need to do is you need to move each one hex at a time. So let's say we're assault moving. So I'm declaring platoon movement and assault movement. So you will move 1 hex, 1 hex, 1 another hex, and 1 another hex. There we go. We've got our 1 movement point so far. And remember, they need to agend. So we're going to have 5. So there's 2, 3, 4. And then let's move the camera. 1, 2. There's 3, 3, 3. Now, this guy's going to stop here. These guys are going to go again. He's going to stop there. He's going to stop there. So, that is platoon movement. Remember, key things. 1 is no more than 3 hexes. The hexes must be adjacent to each other. And you must have a combat effective leader in one of the hexes. You also do get the leader movement bonus as well of +1 for all the platoons riding.